Lauren. I'm with the Greater Louisville Bonsai Society, and I've been with the Greater Louisville Bonsai Society for a couple years off and on. Been doing bonsai for about 20 years. Um, the history of bonsai, we're going to be talking about the history and the horticultural practice, how you create bonsai and where bonsai come from. So bonsai, the question always is kind of how it's created, what kind of plants can you create them from? The truth is you can create them from any kind of plant that is a woody stemmed tree-like plant. It's actually not most people think that there is a particular plant you can create them out of. That is actually not the case. It's actually, you can create almost a bonsai from any woody plant. So the other question I think a lot of people have is it just foot binding and crazy haircuts? And from all intents and purposes, you kind of get a bonsai tree when you do that. And so the answer is yes. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. What's funny is there is a very famous bonsai guy in Germany that creates bonsai by what he calls a hedge trimming method. And the reality is that if you find somebody that has a hedge of any kind of plants, and you go in and they've been trimming them back year after year, the benefit of that is that it gives you multiple branches, that backbuds over year after year. And so that actually is a viable option. So when you're trying to develop a piece of material, you can actually just take a hedge trimmer and do that a couple of years, and then you get material to work with, which is actually a viable way to create bonsai. In recent past, there have been some studies that talk about whether or not plants actually can feel pain or can convey pain. The reality is that plants don't have a nervous system, so they actually really can't feel pain or convey pain. But they obviously communicate through pheromones and other means and methods. Mycorrhiza in the ground is another form of communication between trees. But they actually don't feel pain, so we are actually not torturing plants by doing bonsai. As with everything, it always starts kind of with the base and the foundation. Soil, as most people think of it, is this loamy sand soil that you grow in a garden, use in a garden space. We don't actually use that material. With this kind of material, you maintain a lot of moisture, which is great when you're in the ground or if you're trying to grow vegetables and that kind of thing. But with bonsai, you actually want to grow with a more granular substance that actually not only holds moisture, but also allows airflow. And I'll get to why that's important in a minute. As with any sort of hobby, any sort of interest, there is always a subject that is taboo, or somebody comes up every year with, hey, I found the newest, greatest possible thing you could ever grow bonsai in. And so it's always that this is that subject for bonsai. For on message boards and all that, there's always somebody that shows up and says, I found the next greatest thing you could grow bonsai in. These are kind of the typical components. So, lava, pumice, calcined clay, which is a fired clay. Pine bark is kind of a way to maintain more moisture if you have a plant that needs more moisture, like a maple. All of these components are very commonly used in bonsai. This is a pumice, black and red lava. Turfus is the product that they use on baseball diamonds, which is that calcined clay. It's a fired clay. You can get pre-mixed bonsai from order online kind of thing. They have the calcined clay and some black lava and some pumice in there. You can also actually use things like oil dry, which is basically just diatomaceous earth, and which is a common product that's used for cat litter. So you can actually use all of these products are viable options for growing bonsai in. But the one that is the preeminent end-all be-all of bonsai is a product called akadama. And this is a product from Japan, and it's similar to diatomaceous earth in that it's a clay that's formed in a volcanic process, and it's imported from Japan. So here are some of the qualities of akadama. So it's from Japan. It actually is. You only can get it really from Japan. It's formed in volcanic eruptions. It hardens over time, and it becomes this granular texture. And so it's surface mined and has been used for generations of bonsai growing. It's by far the premium material you want to use, and it's named, some other information here, and its name translates to red ball earth. All of these components combine to give a premium sort of growing surface for the bonsai roots. And the root system and the way that bonsai are grown, the roots are the critical thing. So in any full-size tree that's out in the world, the only part of that tree that's growing, that's feeding that tree, that's supplying nutrients and energy to that tree are the tips. The rest of it is anchorage and food storage. And so what we do with bonsai is we remove all or most of those anchorage roots by wiring the tree into the pot. And so when you unpot a bonsai tree, what you're seeing are mostly these root tips that need air and moisture, but not too much moisture, because they're very delicate. They're much more delicate than the rest of the root system. And so this is actually what really makes bonsai possible to grow in such a small pot, because you have a premium footprint of productivity, nutrient transfer in a very small footprint. And so you can see here, this is kind of some examples of how we wire into the pot. And then some potters now are actually doing these score marks inside the pot to limit like ring root growth. And so it's a whole sort of there's a technique that's happening with how to kind of make the pots even more active or more part of that process. Another thing that's really commonly known is that trees, all plants in the wild, they have a symbiosis with mycorrhiza, and that is very true of bonsai as well. And the other thing that the granular structure of the soil system we use is it creates a premium environment for mycorrhiza to grow, and that also helps transfer nutrients and all of those things into the tree. And so when you pull a tree out of your pot, this is actually a black pine root. When you pull your tree out of a pot and it has this growing in it, you've got the right mix and the right watering and all of that kind of thing. The other side of the tree, of course, is the leaves. These kind of examples are, this is a sycamore, which grows leaves that are as big as umbrellas. And then you can kind of see in this example, this is sort of a standard maple leaf, and this is a bonsai, where you can see how they're getting smaller. You can, believe it or not, you can actually grow a bonsai sycamore. And the reason for that is that because of the root system that I just talked about, because of the nutrients you're giving it, what happens is the tree doesn't need to put off these gigantic leaves to feed the size of that tree. And so by trimming the branches, it's putting off more branches and the smaller leaves more leaves at a smaller size means it's getting just the same amount of sunlight. Some trees naturally have these smaller leaves. So this is a Chinese elm, and if you're familiar with Chinese elms full grown, they still tend to keep leaves that are only about this big, even full size. But all of this combines to give you what's called ramification. So ramification is what makes a small tree really look like a full-size tree. That ramification is the splitting off of the branches and gives you this dense canopy where this is the same tree looking up from the trunk. And I took these pictures out in California when I went to a bonsai exhibition out there. I mean, this thing is just incredible. I mean, it's by far it is the version of a bonsai tree you want to see for a deciduous. So, I mean, looking up at that picture, to me, it looks like you're laying under a tree looking up at it, under a full-size tree. And that's really what you want with a bonsai. As with anything, there are trees that break rules. The ginkgo is one of them. In Japan, especially, they are a revered tree. They are the oldest tree on the planet. They are basically kind of a living fossil, and so that reverence makes people want to grow bonsai with them. And so the you can't get the ramification that you can with, say, like a elm or a hackberry, but what you do get is this amazing fall display. And so they actually are called a kind of candelabra or a flame style tree, because once that fall kicks off and you get those leaves, they're only there for a couple of days, but man, it's a beautiful couple of days. On the other side are the wisteria. They're a crazy growing vine. They don't ramify. They don't do any of the things that bonsai do, but you get that spring display of those flowers, and it is pretty spectacular. And so we do actually see a lot of wisteria bonsai. Um, these are some of the styles that you can grow bonsai trees in. So you get kind of the formal upright is sort of the most common, very sort of standard, just upright tree. You get these. This is kind of also referred to as a turtleback tree, so a clump sort of structure. You get these cascade versions that are similar to a tree that would be growing on like a cliffside in the mountains, which is actually where bonsai historically came from. So you get a kind of variety of things that you can do with a variety of trees. So talking about a little bit of history, bonsai is a Japanese word. It means plant in a pot, but it actually came from China, which were referred to as penjing. Penjing are traditionally more landscape sort of displays. So they would have a water feature. They might have forests, some rocks, that kind of thing. So they believe this is sort of an earliest example in an art form, in a painting of a bonsai or a penjing. When it moved to Japan, it was very much tied to the Zen Buddhism, and so some of these ink paintings that are very popular in Japanese art, they are examples of kind of the trees you would see as examples of bonsai, and so that's kind of where bonsai moved into a single tree in a single pot, and less the forest kind of style planting. We still do that in bonsai. We actually have forest plantings all the time, but that was the more traditional Japanese side turned it into a single plant in a pot. So here's another old painting, 706 AD. You can see back here in the background. You can see, this is probably a pear. That might be like a pine or a juniper. So you can kind of see some examples of those in older art. As far as the history in the U.S., this is believed to be the oldest tree to be on U.S. soil. So it was the 1876 exhibition in Philadelphia, and then it made a couple trips back over the years. And this one is a very old tree, oldest example of the bonsai in the U.S. This tree has a really amazing story. It was part of 53 trees that were donated to the U.S. by Japan as a diplomatic gesture, and most of these trees are still on display at the Bonsai and Penjing Museum in Washington, D.C. This tree in particular is amazing because it actually survived the Hiroshima bomb. It was only a couple miles away from the Hiroshima bomb. It was luckily protected by a wall that protected it from the blast. And so, but it was actually donated as part of those 53 and is actually on display in Washington, D.C. Some related art forms, as with everything, you tend to see kind of split offs of things when you want to display a tree or, various art forms that come with that. So, of course, Japanese gardens are a given. They are an amazing art form in and of themselves. Within Japanese gardens are an art form called Niwaki, which is kind of doing bonsai techniques with trees in the garden. So trimming them, shaping their branches. If you've ever been to a Japanese garden, you kind of see branches sort of propped up with sticks, and that's to kind of push them into positions that they want to keep them in. So that's a very common one. Kusamono is an amazing one. It's one that I really love. It's basically, Kusamono means grass in a pot. And what it is a traditional thing that happens when you display a bonsai. You would have this accent plant that would indicate like a season or a particular place. Like if if this pine grew in a very specific location, you might have a kusamono that was a plant from that same location. And so these are kokodame balls, which are moss balls that you can grow plants into. That's another form of kind of kusamono. And then these are just some other examples. Flowers, of course, are always fun. Grass, these smaller succulents. Horsetail is a very common one. Another related art form is suiseki, which is what's called a scholar stone. It also comes very much from the Zen Buddhism world. So these are stones that typically either represent the mountainscape that you would see bonsai growing on, so it's a similar sort of aesthetic, or you would see something like a hut or even something like a bird. But the most common kind of thought about suiseki is something that looks like a mountain range. And if you find a stone that looks anything like Mount Fuji, it's like the prized possession of suiseki. Of course, the pots with bonsai are basically like picture frames with art. And so you want a pot that proportionally fits the tree, supports the tree obviously as a pot because you're only growing in a certain little footprint, but aesthetically, traditionally things like pines and junipers would be grown in a very sort of low-key, just unglazed pot because they give off a sort of rougher sort of aesthetic, but something like a maple or a more flowering pot, you would want a more kind of accent type of plant, or pot, sorry. Something with some color, something with some flair. These are some amazing potters from around this area. Waldo Street Pottery is a great one. And actually the pottery has become such a big part of it. They're actually doing a competition now in the national show in New York. They'll actually have a separate whole competition just for pots. Another one is stands. So when you display bonsai, you want to lift them up kind of like a sculptural form into a position where you can kind of really look at them at eye level. And so you would see a variety of stands that would do that and give you that sort of proportional display of being able to lift the tree above your accent or above another tree that would be another kind of an accent. You can see them as these really sculptural forms themselves or something a little more understated that really shows off the tree, but it's still a beautiful piece in and of itself. This is a 5-point display of shohin trees. Shohin is a size of tree. So mame is kind of is a bonsai that can sit in the palm of your hand. Shohin is a little size up, and so this is a display of shohin trees. And then you see these kind of modern furniture making sort of styles that are just kind of amazing. Give you this really beautiful sort of triangle shape and accent that overhang of the tree itself. So as I mentioned, I've been doing this for about 20 years. I started when my wife got me one of those little kits with a tiny little pot and a stupid little seed. And I opened it up and looked at the instructions and was like, God, I'm gonna be dead before this is something I can work with. And so what I did at the time, I'm just old enough that I went to the library and got every book I could find on bonsai. And as I was going through those, I realized that one of the common things you can do, which I didn't know at the time, was you can collect landscaping material and turn it into bonsai trees. And so for me, that was kind of like, whoa, wait, what? I can just go collect my neighbor's, shrubs and turn them into bonsai trees. And so that's what I started doing. I would start driving around and start noticing people's landscaping. And, if it was overgrown or in a weird space on their yard, I would knock on their door and say, hey, you gonna do anything with that shrub, or are you interested in having it removed, or I'll replace it for you with something different if you like it, or if you want, if you need something there. And so I started collecting these trees from my neighbors. And so these are some taxus bushes that I collected from a neighbor who lived a couple houses down from me, and the entire family was deaf. And the son was chopping these things down. And he had his back to me, and I was watching him do this, and I guess they were getting ready to tear the shed down that they were in front of. And he was just hacking them, just chainsaw, just hacking them down. And I was like, oh my God, I got to stop him because I need to tell him I want those shrubs. But he had his back to me and he was deaf. And so the only way I could do it was I took a little rock and threw it at the shed in front of him. And he saw the rock and was like, what the hell? And turned around. And I was like, I'll come over and I'll dig those out for you. Just don't chop them off. And he got it and was like, you want these? I was like, yes, both of them. I want both of them. And so I went over there a couple of days later and dug them out for him. And so this is what they came out looking like. A friend on Facebook bought a house and sent out something saying, hey, does anybody know anybody that can come tear out all this landscaping? And I was like, whoa, hey, can I come look at it first? What kind of landscaping are we talking about here? And so I went and collected this privet. And privet's one of my favorite trees to work with because you almost can't kill them, honestly. Like you show up, you come home from a week out and they're dried to a bone. You can throw some water on them, they'll come right back. But I developed it, I trimmed it back, I got it wired, shaped it up to start to set some branches, which this is a very common way that we do this. You wire the branch, you push it into a position, and then as that branch grows, it hardens off. You can take the wire off and it stays where it needs to. So this is a very common way of setting branches. You let it grow, you kind of do this process again, and then this was in the show last year at Waterfront Botanicals. This is another one. I was a remodeler for a little while and was working on a job. They had this 6-foot boxwood hedge that was kind of just in a bad spot in their yard. And I literally the same thing, hey, just out of curiosity, are you interested in getting this thing out of here? And they're like, yeah, we've been trying to kill that thing for years, take it. So I took it, I chopped it all down to nothing. It sprouted back out, did the wiring. This is a very hard one to wire because obviously boxwood is a really hard wood, so you kind of have to catch them early. But I guy wired it and did some wiring. And then this was at the show in Botanical Gardens a couple years ago. So of those two that I collected from my neighbor, only one of them lived. I did a little bit of work. This is early on. I had trimmed it back to kind of the branches that I wanted. This was early on at a show that we used to do at UDEL. This is kind of, again, you can see, some guy wires here, pulling the branches down, some wires sort of just setting that structure. 18 years later, and this was at the show last year at the Waterfront Botanical. So all of this wood here is dead. So all the live stuff is from the back side of this, and there's a live vein that comes back here supporting that. So all of this, and the whiteness of that is done with what's called lime sulfur. It bleaches the wood and makes it that white. So mentioned the show. We have another show coming up this year. It's a 3rd annual bonsai show at the Waterfront Botanical. It's a great event. We had it the first year, and they just let us have a show basically, and 2,000 people came through in a weekend. And so the next year they were like, whoa, we gotta do something with this. And so we got vendors, they have food, they have a bar, they have events, they have partners that they work with, and they have all kinds of stuff going on. It's a great event. It's really starting to take off. The other thing that's happening at the Waterfront Botanical is they are getting ready to build a permanent bonsai display called the Greater Bonsai Garden. It's going to have 5 spaces that kind of show off different trees, all based on different elements. They're a couple million away from their fundraising goal, but they're going to break ground this fall on it. It's going to be great. They've actually got a seed collection that were donated by one of our members that passed away a couple years ago. And so they have actually a small collection of trees already, which is going to be a great place for them to show it. So there's some more information here. Of course, Waterfront Botanical is here. They're at a booth just over behind the stage over here. And then, this is some information on our club if anybody's interested. And anybody have any questions? Thank you all for sitting through my talk.